Well, hello and welcome to another edition of Be Still My Soul. We're doing these reflections to help you rest your souls in God. And today we're looking at Psalm 14. Psalm 14 is almost identical to Psalm 53. And the fact that there are two psalms almost the same highlights the importance of the theme. Now, I've titled this psalm, Does God Believe in Atheists? Because this psalm is all about the folly, the foolishness of practical atheism and the freedom from it. By practical atheism, I don't mean an intellectual atheism, one that argues against the existence of God. It might mean that. But what I mean is doing life as if God doesn't exist. Doing life without reference to God. That's practical atheism. And that's something that all of us do by nature. All of us by nature, when we're born, are practical atheists. We all want to live with ourselves as boss, rather than God. And this psalm describes practical atheism. It shows its downfall, and yet it shows how people can be rescued from it. So 3 things I want us to see from this short but this very strong psalm. First of all, the description of practical atheism. David begins the psalm with these words. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. The first thing we're told about practical atheists, what we're like by nature, is we're told something about our speech. The fool, that is, not somebody who's intellectually stupid, but somebody who is morally wicked. Somebody who rejects wisdom. There's a man in the Old Testament called Nabal, and that word Nabal means fool. It's the word that's used here. And he was a foolish man. He was a very successful man, a very wealthy farmer, and yet he wasn't wise. You can read about him in 1 Samuel. And the fool, all of us by nature, say in our hearts there is no God. We speak in our hearts there is no God. This isn't something we say out loud, although sometimes people do. But in our hearts we dismiss God, ignore God, live without him as our boss, act as if he's not there, act as if he will not hold us to account. That's what we're saying to ourselves in our hearts. He will not judge me. But our speech leads to desires. We're told here that they are corrupt. That our desires are corrupt. Or again in verse 3, they've all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. That word, to turn aside, refers to milk that's gone sour. The word corrupt refers to something that stinks, smells, gone rotten. And here God is surveying the whole human race, just like he did at the flood. And he finds that the whole human race have gone astray. They've all become corrupt. They stink. And their desires stink. They're rotten to the core. But of course, our speech in our hearts leads to what we think in our hearts, leads to our desires, which lead in turn to actions. Verse 1 again. They do abominable deeds. Our actions should not see the light of day. They're abominable, abhorrent, both to God, and they should be abhorrent to other people as well. And those bad actions are done in the world. There is none who does good. Verse 2. The Lord looks down from heaven on the children of man to see if there are any who understand, who seek after God. They've all turned aside. Together they have become corrupt. There's none who does good, not even one. It's quite categorical. No one does good. You see, why bother trying to be good and do good in the world if there is no God? But not only do people do no good in the world, but they do no good towards God's people. Verse 4. Have they no knowledge, all the evildoers who eat up my people as they eat bread, and do not call upon the Lord? To eat up is to consume. To eat up people is to consume their wealth, to consume their freedom, to consume their lives. In other words, the enmity, the hatred we have towards God by nature in our hearts is expressed by hating God's people, wanting to eat them up, wanting to get rid of them in the world. Now, the Apostle Paul picks up verse 3 and the ideas here in these first 4 verses in Romans chapter 3 and says that this is a description of the whole human race by nature. All the human race has turned away from God. All the human race has sinned. See, what is sin? Sin is implying that we know better than God. Sin is loving evil more than we love good. And we're all infected by it. You know, we like to think we're an exception to the rule, that we're a good person. Well, we might be relatively good compared to other people, but by nature we're not. By nature our hearts are wicked and evil. We speak in our hearts there is no God. Our desires are corrupt, they stink, and our actions are bad. This is a perennial and a universal condition. But David goes on in verses 5 and 6 to show the downfall of practical atheism. And he says there's 2 ways in which practical atheism will fall. First, through terror, and second, through transformation. First of all, through terror. The terror that David describes might be a past situation that David saw them in. It consisted in a realization that the Lord is on the side of the righteous and the poor. He says this, there they are in great terror, for God is with the generation of the righteous. You would shame the plans of the poor, but the Lord is his refuge. See, David is saying this. He's saying, the wicked, the fools, all of us by nature will be terrified. In fact, might be terrified, because we know that God is on the side of the righteous, the poor, the one who trusts in him. And God will be their refuge. He will protect them. He will defeat their enemies in this life and in the life to come. And that's terrifying if you're standing against God's people. It's terrifying if you stand against God. You know, Jesus told the parable of the rich man and Lazarus. And that parable is a terrifying parable for us to look at. Because it says that those who are poor, oppressed, needy, and yet trusting in the Lord will be protected. But those who are rich and powerful, the oppressors and abusers of God's people, those who hate God in their hearts, will one day be judged. And that judgment is terrifying. But not only will practical atheism fall through judgment and through terror, it will fall through transformation. There are some people who God here calls my people, who God calls, who God says that he is their refuge, whom God is with, whom God is on the side of, who've been delivered from foolishness by the grace of God. See, there are millions of people who've been born fools, but who are made wise through Jesus Christ. God has made them wise, has given them grace, has revealed himself to them, has fit them for heaven, even though they deserve hell. And so practical atheism will be defeated in one of these 2 ways, either through terror and judgment or through transformation and change. God changes fools and makes them wise. And so finally, verse 7, we're told of the delight of those who used to be practical atheists. You see, if you've been a practical atheist, but you know the grace of God, you can know delight. Or that salvation for Israel would come out of Zion. When the Lord restores the fortunes of his people, let Jacob rejoice, let Israel be glad. See, in light of this situation and the assurance that God will deal with and defeat practical atheism once for all, the psalm ends with prayer and with hope. Hope that God will rescue. Hope that God will do good to his people. You see, How can we have this hope? Because the Lord dwells in a particular way in Zion. He dwells in Zion in the Old Testament. That was the hill on which Jerusalem, the city of Jerusalem, was built. In the middle of Zion was the temple in which people met with God. God dwelt there. It was the place of salvation, the place to come with sacrifices and to be right with God. Well, come to the New Testament, and Zion is even more the place of salvation because it's the place where Jesus Christ died. It's the place that God himself came and died and rose again, the place of salvation. The place in which Jesus Christ paid for sinners, paid the price for foolish people like you and me, paid for us so that we could be wise, died for his enemies, punished in our place so that we could be his friends. That's happened at the cross and will be completed one day when Jesus returns. And so while we're waiting for that coming restoration, you and I can rejoice and be glad in the knowledge that God is going to deal with practical atheism once for all, because the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of God as the waters cover the sea. That is the hope which we're looking forward to. That is the hope that Jesus provides through the cross. Does God believe in atheists? Oh, he saved you, he saved me, and he can save you as well. Thank you so much for listening and for tuning in. Until next week, God bless.